live video stream at 560theanswer.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Lori the Lightfoot, in her inaugural speech yesterday, she took up the issue of public safety and, of course, guns.
Today we reimagine the first star, standing for safety in every neighborhood. People cannot and should not live in neighborhoods that resemble a war zone. Enough of the shootings, enough of the guns, enough of the violence. Let's unite in our response to the biggest challenge we face, the epidemic of gun violence that devastates families, shatters communities, buries dreams, and holds children hostage in their homes for fear. We must reverse the exodus by creating the reality of safety in every neighborhood. Public safety must not be a commodity that is only available to the wealthy.
Yeah. Against violence. Bold position. Although the last line that she offered, public safety must not be something only offered to the wealthy. Guess who agrees with that? Well, we all do, including John Lott, the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, the author of The War on Guns, More Guns, Less Crime. He's got a new piece out that was posted at foxnews.com that may be of interest to Lori Lightfoot. I doubt it, but can at least suggest it. That the gun bans proposed by the Democrat Socialist candidates for president hurt the people that Lori Lightfoot is talking about helping. Poor, disproportionately minorities in places like Chicago, South, and West Sides. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid John Lott. John, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
So Lori Lightfoot wants the West and South Sides to stop being shooting galleries, as we all do. She's talking about the quote-unquote epidemic of gun violence, the pat line of the left. You're suggesting that that line and the policies that normally flow from it actually hurt the people they intend to benefit with more safety.
Right. Look, if they're going to reduce the gun violence, they have to deal seriously with the fact that we're talking about gangs. We're talking about drug gangs that are there. And they have to think about why the drug gangs fight against each other. And they do that because the profits involved in selling drugs. You know, Chicago had a big gang violence, in a sense, back in the early 1930s. That ended after a couple years. Maybe they could go and think about what was involved with reducing that gang violence, which was essentially getting rid of prohibition at the time. And I'm not going to go and argue that that's nirvana, because obviously as the price of drugs go down, you're going to have more people who are going to be using them. But going and just thinking that by banning guns, you're going to stop the drug gangs from getting a hold of guns just isn't serious. It's no more serious than thinking that we've been able to stop these drug gangs from getting a hold of the drugs that they go and sell. I mean, you could look at a country like Mexico, and they have one gun store in the country since 1972. The most powerful rifle, for example, that you can go and buy in Mexico legally is a .22 short round. I mean, that's like the least powerful rifle that's possible to go and buy in the United States. I mean, there's a couple specialty rifles that may be less powerful. But Mexico has a murder rate that's 5 times higher than what we have here in the United States. They're not
So
firing
would you,
22.
would you argue, though, that the people in Mexico don't have a right to defend themselves because they can't purchase weapons there? Or if they do, there's only one gun store in the whole country?
I think they should have a right to defend themselves. I mean, what you guys are talking about, what Dan was talking about, the types of rules that we have. I mean, look at we have candidates for the Democrat presidential nomination coming out for licensing guns. Cory Booker, New Jersey, they have a $100 fee to get a firearms ID, and then you have to pay another $50 to be able to go and get a permit for the gun. And they want to have universal background checks, these background checks on the private transfers of guns. In Washington, D.C., where they're going to be voting on that, it's $125 per gun. If I were to sell you 4 guns in Washington, D.C., that's $500. They charge it per gun. I mean, the fact that these guys support things like a separate background check on each gun rather than to the person. If I sell it to you, Amy, or to Dan, why not just have one background check on the person? I mean, you'd be getting all 4 guns that I would be selling to you. Why have a separate background check on each gun? It just shows that they go out of their way to go and make it as costly as possible. And they talk about poor people rather than wealthy people being able to defend themselves. Who do they think they stop with something like a $500 cost? Or in Illinois, in order to get a concealed handgun permit, you have $150 fee. Then you have to pay for the 16 hours of training that's there. We're talking about easily $400 to go through the process to go and get a concealed carry permit, $450 in many cases to go through and do it. The very people that need guns the most, the very people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime, poor minorities, poor blacks who live in places like the south side of Chicago, where I used to live when I taught at the University of Chicago, they're the ones who need guns the most for protection. Police are important, but police themselves realize that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crime has occurred. And what do you advise someone to do when they're having to confront a criminal who's broken into their home or is threatening them and their family in some other place in the South Side?
Yeah, but here's the problem. The problem is that those families and individuals you're talking about are already locked down by the people proposing to restrict their access to the means of self-protection. And so this is what the Democrat socialists understand. Doug Schoen, writing in The Hill, Every Town for Gun Safety survey, 91% of millennials say the position a candidate has on guns is important when deciding who they're going to vote for, and you know what they're saying. That was in the 2018 midterms. One of the upsets in 2018, Lucy McBath, a Democrat who won a district that was formerly held by House Speaker Newt Gingrich in Georgia. She's a gun control activist whose son was killed in a 2012 shooting. Reuters poll has 69% of Americans, 85% of Democrats, along with 57% of Republicans, want strong or moderate restriction placed on firearms to stop gun violence in the wake of these school shootings and shootings at houses of worship. And so the sentimentality is overwhelming the data and the logic, and that turns out to be a real political problem.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, I'm not sure how much weight to put on some of these polls. And the Lucy McBath thing, Michael Bloomberg spent $110 million on congressional races.
Sure, that helps.
He spent over $5 million just on her race. That's just, and it just completely overwhelmed the other candidate who, the district, it's been a long time since Newt Gingrich was there. The previous Republican Handel had just barely won a race in a special election before. The district's changed a lot.
Well, but
even with that,
the underlying point, though, are you concerned though that there is political potency to the to the red herrings that are being advanced by the Democrat socialists?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who care about that, and you can see changes over time in the support for gun control. I don't put quite as much weight on a lot of these polls, some people do. So, for example, one of the common claims you hear is that 90% or 95% of Americans support these background checks on private transfers of guns. Well, Michael Bloomberg's put it up for initiatives. He's put it up in 2016 in Maine and Nevada. He outspent his opponents in Maine by 6-1, and he lost. In Nevada, he outspent his opponents by 3-1, and he won by less than 1 percentage point. And because of flaws, it was never able to go into effect. But you know, if he was right, if those polls were right, that 90-some% of people support these background checks on private transfers, you wouldn't need to outspend the other side 3 or 6-1 and not be able to break 50% or struggle to break 50% on it. It should be an easy cakewalk, and it hasn't been. And I think these polls, often when they go and ask these questions, are things like, do you want to stop criminals from having guns?
Yeah, I understand.
It's basically the way a lot of these things read. And
Right.
Well, whenever we have you on, it's a great time to talk about, if you do own a gun, it's a great deal of responsibility. And I wanted to ask
Sure.
you about the shooting at the Denver high school where 8 were shot, 1 died. The hero kid tackled the gunman, took a bullet.
Right.
Those 2 weapons were the 18-year-old kid's parents. And shouldn't they be charged with something? Because they had a responsibility to lock up their weapon, and they didn't. Because he easily took the weapons and then brought them to school, gave one to his girlfriend or whatever she is, and then they started shooting up the school. I mean, shouldn't they be charged with something for not properly locking and securing their weapon?
Is there a lockbox requirement in Colorado?
Yeah, I believe it is. But in any case, my understanding was that they had stored the weapons, that the person had broken in and taken the weapons that were there. But, in any case, I wish it was easy to stop people from being able to go and get guns. You go and ask high school students or you go and ask college students if they can go and obtain illegal drugs. When I go to college campuses and I ask that question, you often will get 3/4 of the students to raise their hands. I'm not saying they actually use drugs, but if you go and you ask them, if I give you a couple days, are you going to be able to go and find illegal drugs? The vast majority of students think that they can do that. These drug dealers have guns. They have guns, if only to go and protect their very valuable property, the drugs that they're selling. And the notion, you look at these attacks, they're planned at least 6 months in advance. Some, like the Sandy Hook attack, are planned 2.5 years in advance at least. If you give somebody 6 months to go and plan an attack, maybe they were able to go and obtain the gun from their family or something, but the question is, do you think you're going to be able to stop them from being able to go and buy illegal drugs over that long of a period of time? Do you think you're going to be able to stop them from being able to go and obtain guns from these drug dealers? Drug dealers are a major source of selling illegal guns.
Well, and how many of these cases have there been multiple opportunities, engagement with law enforcement, engagement with school officials, and they have fallen. The shooters have fallen through the cracks too. So you want this utopian, a perfect system on the one side, and you just excuse all of the failures and gaps, whether it be the military or law enforcement or school officials on the other side. It's just, but this is the problem. You get half this country are sentimental barbarians, and there is no logic, and there is no connection to inputs to outputs. So we got to tell stories, and you got to keep making the point over and over again, as you do, John Lott, through your research and synthesizing it into op-eds like the one I mentioned at foxnews.com. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, author of a number of books on the topic of gun rights, The War on Guns, and More Guns, Less Crime. John, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.